Let's roll. Okay, let's get started, everyone, please. If you're thinking about coming in, now is the time, please. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name's Walter Babich, and I'm the City Manager, and I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the unceded ancestral lands of the Claytley 10A, on whose land we live, work, and play. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you also to those watching our live stream for this engagement opportunity in the lead up to the 2025 city budget. I hope you all had a chance to attend the open house this afternoon in the foyer and browse through the booths, take the surveys that we have related to the city budget, and also chat with members of our city council that are here. If you haven't yet had the chance to visit some of the booths, you can still do so during one of our breaks, as some city staff will be here for a little while longer. So, as I mentioned, we do have a number of members of City Council here today, and I'd like to briefly acknowledge them. But before doing that, I'll start by passing along regrets on behalf of Mayor Simon Yu, who unfortunately cannot be with us today as he's overseas attending to family matters. And also, I'd like to pass along regrets from Councillor Brian Skaken, who is also unable to attend due to some family obligations. So we do have, I believe, the rest of members of City Council here. Seen Councillor Tim Bennett. Is he here or outside? I think he was outside. Councillor Garth Frizzell as well. Seen the foyer as well. Councillor Trudy Clausen. Councillor Ron Palillo. Councillor Corey Ramsey. Councillor Kyle Sampson. Thank you. Councillor Susan Scott. Thank you very much, councillors. So the purpose of this event is to hear from you about your priorities for the upcoming city budget. The agenda for this evening includes timed presentations from city staff on various areas of city services, but city staff will not be giving lengthy presentations this evening. As we said, the purpose of this event is really to hear from you and your priorities. But we are going to set the stage with some background information on the orders of government and the budget process, which we hope will help some of your questions and input be framed. So I'll kick that off, and the first slide we have, those of you that have been to our budget engagement sessions before, this will look familiar to you. We have a little bit on jurisdiction of the different orders of government. We share this with you because we often hear from residents asking us to address issues that relate to an area that our staff will often say is outside of the city's jurisdiction. So, of course, we work with all levels of government, and there are some services that are provided by other orders of government that are resourced from other forms of revenue, such as income tax. So while the services from the federal and provincial governments obviously also benefit our residents here in Prince George, the city simply just isn't resourced to assist with most of those services. Our City Council does, of course, advocate to the other orders of government to address issues in our city relating to the services that those orders of government are responsible for, but the city does not directly provide those services. So, in short, as you can see in the slide behind me, we have 3 orders of government: federal, provincial, and local governments, and they each have their own sets of responsibilities. This is set under the Constitution of Canada, and the federal government is responsible for national and international issues, including the items shown on the slide. So the items shown on the slide include income tax and employment insurance, things of that nature. The provincial government is responsible for regional issues, including the items shown on this slide, like housing, schools, healthcare, social services, and education. Local governments are granted powers by the provincial government. There are two forms of local government in BC: municipalities, cities such as the City of Prince George, towns and villages, and regional districts, which also include the unincorporated rural areas outside of our municipal boundaries. So local governments, like the City of Prince George, were responsible for local services, and this is the order of government that's the closest to the people. Our order of government shapes our communities through bylaws and policies such as land use planning, and we offer the services that are listed on this slide as a summary. So these are the services that your city is providing for you, and we'd like your input on in terms of your priorities. So before rolling into those presentations, I'd like to briefly introduce our city staff that are here today, and we would do that through, first of all, the Office of City Manager is the department that I lead, and we have 5 directors that are responsible for other departments. Also, in the Office of the City Manager, we have Legislative Services, which is responsible for organizing City Council meetings, city records, municipal elections, FOI, and privacy, and Human Resources and Corporate Safety. So the 5 directors of the other city departments, I'll introduce to you now. We have our Director of Administrative Services, that's Eric Depineau, and Eric's department is made up of the services on this slide. We have our Director of Civic Operations, it's Blake McIntosh, and Blake's department is made up of the following services. We have our Director of Civic Facilities and Events, that's Andy Beasley, and Andy's department is made up of the services that you see on this slide. And we have our Director of Planning and Development, Deanna Wozniak, and Deanna's department is made up of the services that are shown on this slide. I'd also like to introduce our Director of Finance and IT Services. It's Chris Dalio, and Chris's department is made up of the following services that are on this slide. Before moving on to Chris's presentation, I'd also like to introduce our Manager of Communications. That's Julie Rogers. Julie is behind you there. Thank you, Julie. Julie's going to be helping out with the microphone for the questions and also facilitating questions using the Slido app. So a reminder to those of you that are watching this on your live stream at home, you're able to participate in the Q&A sessions using Slido, and the details of that will be shared with you shortly. So I'd like to invite Chris up to give you a brief overview of the city's budget, and then we'll go into the Q&A session for that portion. Thank you.
Hey everybody. So I don't have a 2025 budget for you yet, it's still being compiled, but just so you kind of understand how this works for us, administration's job is to cost out and estimate what it will take for us to maintain the service levels that we currently have. So in order for me to try and get an idea for you tonight, we've put this slide up in front of you so you have an understanding of where your dollars are currently going. And so most of these are very similar to other municipalities, I think you would find. Over 1/3 of our budget is spent on protective services, and these are things like police services, fire, emergency services, and bylaw. Our next one, again, no surprise, roads, snow removal, your street lighting, all of that stuff goes into the transportation, which is our second biggest bucket. Recreation and culture, so we of course like our arenas, we like our pools, parks, baseball fields, all of those fall under the rec and culture. General government is the 4th biggest bucket, but I really need to explain this one a bit further. So when we talk about police, we're only talking about the service of police, but there's a lot that goes behind what a municipality does. We have financial reporting. The police building has IT needs. There's human resources that goes out and hires all the support services. We have a mayor and council. We have an office of city manager. So there's all of these support services that are necessary for our framework of government to exist. And so while general government is the fourth biggest bucket, it's actually spread out amongst every single service. It's just for this slide, we show it to you all at once. Debt servicing. If we borrow $30 million, we of course don't have $30 million to pay off the next year. We do it over the course of 20 years typically. And so the debt servicing costs are the principal and interest payments that we make in a year based on the debt that we've contracted in previous years. Public transit is really just that. It's the BC Transit portion. So BC Transit is a contractor to us, and we pay them, and they operate the bus system for us with some limited support from city staff. Fiscal miscellaneous, that's really just the bulk of that is contingencies, and so we keep a contingency in place in case something unexpected comes up during the year. We also hold certain amounts aside if a collective agreement is not negotiated yet. So we have two major unions that make up a lot of our staff. One is CUPE, and the other is the IFF for the firefighters. So if they have expired collective agreements and they're still getting negotiated, we hold aside estimates in here. Environment and public health is solid waste, cemetery, those types of expenses, and planning and development is mostly a revenue neutral sort of operation. That's why it's such a low dollar figure. There's actually a lot of staff that goes into planning and development, but we offset from the revenue they collect for things like building licenses and variance permits and the like. One thing I'd like to point out to everybody is we have what's called a service called Citizen Budget. And so it's an online tool. We've been doing it every year for a number of years now. And it's a cool little tool where you can kind of play with these categories and decide whether or not you would put less money towards it or more money towards it. And there's also an optional thing that you can do where you put in your own house assessment value, and it will tell you, based on these sorts of choices that you would make, what that would mean in dollars to your tax bill. And it's an estimate. It gives council a bit of a tool as to where they're seeing people saying, this is what I'd like to see happen with dollar figures. So I would encourage all of you to go to Citizen Budget. You can access it through the city's website and fill that out if you'd like. And it's in place until October, Julie, do you know the date we're running it to?
I do know the date, and I'm going to tell you in a minute. November the 8th.
Thank you very much. All right, a lot of what I talk about is stuff that, as long as I have people listening, I'd love to try and tell you some of the challenges that we have. So this is something I'll share whenever I get the opportunity to. This is a breakdown of what your tax bill is. A lot of people get a tax bill for their house, and let's say hypothetically it's $3,000. They're like, oh, I owe the city $3,000. Not really. You only owe us $2,100. We're only about 70% of your tax bill. What we do is we're a central repository to collect for other levels of government. So we collect on behalf of the hospital, the school, the regional district, the municipal finance authority, BC assessment, and we take all that money in and then we pay each individual authority their share. So when you see that tax bill, it's just a quick reminder that it's not all the city of Prince George. There's other amounts in your tax bill that you pay for. We, quite frankly, take the heat for the high tax bill, and we do that because there's a benefit for the one taxpayer at the end. If we all had our own service centers and our own billing collection, it would cost the public a lot more money in general, and you'd have to be running from one place to the next, to the next, to the next to pay your bill. So this is really a nice service that we try and provide for the taxpayers in our town. This is the other thing that I'll take every opportunity I can to talk about. It's what we call, we give it the name the infrastructure story, but if I were to try and tell you what City of Prince George's biggest challenge is, this is it for me. We have a colossal footprint. We are very spread out. We are the size of Las Vegas, and so normally when you have a city this size, geographically, you have at least 500,000 people to support it. We only have 75,000 to 80,000 people. So what that means for us is when you have infrastructure that uses the space, and I'm talking mostly about roads, sewer, water, street lights, line painting for those roads, all of those things that take up the space, there are less of us to pay for every square kilometer of that. And so that's what makes it challenging for us. As a city of our size, if we had 75,000 people in, let's say, Victoria, in a very small space, it's so much easier to have nice things because the infrastructure is nice and consolidated in one spot, and we're very spread out. So to give you an idea, our city is almost 110 years old, and after World War II, we were a boom community. And in the 1970s, we really started expanding our borders because every single indicator at that time was showing that we were going to be 250,000 people by this time. And of course, that didn't happen. And we are now have a very spread out place with not as many people as we thought to pay for it all. And so what that means for our infrastructure is that it primarily came at a time of rapid growth. You can see that big spike in the graph where we built a lot to anticipate what was coming at us. But what that means now is that that was about 50 years ago, and a lot of our infrastructure has about a 50-year shelf life. So a lot of that stuff that got built in that spike of time is all coming due right in this decade. I love and hate this slide because it talks about how the Elks Center is almost 50 years old and is close to the same age as our average infrastructure. The reason I hate this slide is because it's the exact same age as me, and so it's hard for me to say, okay, oh God, I'm getting older too. But moving on to a bit of a visual graphic that you can see. This is what I mean when I say we're huge. We are 329 square kilometers. You can see Victoria there at 19 kilometers, Nanaimo at 90, Saanich at 104. You could fit all three of these inside our boundary, and they all have more people to pay for their stuff than we do. One more last visual graphic for this, and then I'll move on to something else. This gives you an idea of what our density is like and how many people represent each 100 represents 100 people per square kilometer. So we are by far the lowest of that graph. And this is to kind of qualify and back up what we were talking about. It helps to sort of illustrate that volume of assets that we are maintaining. So $4.4 billion would what it would be to replace everything that we own if we had to. Our huge geographic size means that we got more of that linear infrastructure that I was talking about. But you can see some of the other really cool sort of graphics on here. 820 kilometers of water pipes, 704 of sewer, 440 of storm drainage. We've got 56 city-owned buildings, 102 parks. I won't read the rest out for you, but it's just to give you an idea of that sheer volume and what a huge organization this is and how difficult it is to maintain everything and deliver all of these services for you year in and year out. So this is the grand summary slide to kind of wrap it all up. We have what's called a representative home value. So this isn't, this is a figure that's actually generated by the province. And what it's meant to do is say, because all of our real estate is worth a different thing from city to city, because usually oceanfront property, for example, is more valuable than not. And so you can see that we have a pretty low representative home value, $463,000 for Prince George. Something like Kelowna has just over $1 million. And what that means is, what this table is sort of meant to represent is that if some forklift came along and picked up your home of $500,000 and dropped it in Kelowna, it instantly becomes worth twice as much just because it's Kelowna. And so when you see a tax rate per thousand, we might be charging $6 per thousand on your assessed value in order to collect the money that we need. But because their assessed values are so much higher in Kelowna, they might only be charging you $3 per thousand. But we're both collecting the same amount of money to run our city. And so that's what that second part of the graph is meant to represent. Your municipal taxes on that representative home, even though our tax rate per thousand is higher, the actual value of what we collect is lower than almost everyone on that slide, with the exception of Chilliwack. So I think that's kind of where I'm going to stop talking. Like we said, we wanted to keep our comments short and just sort of set a framework so that you guys can start to ask us questions, and we're here to listen to you.
Try again. Ooh, there it is. Thank you. I'm happy to run to you if you want to raise your hand and let me know if you've got a question. And here I come.
So this is perhaps a bit of a naive question, but is the City of Prince George doing anything to try to increase the density or the amount of people in Prince George so we don't have this problem that you've outlined?
See if this is on. Yeah, okay, right, thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. So right now, you might have noticed the booth outside that's highlighting our OCP, which has been under review for the past 18 months, and we're at the draft stage of it. Within that OCP talks about where we want to see urban densification. We encourage everyone to take part in reviewing that document for purposes like this, for asset management, for informing where we want to see growth, focus growth, and to help, again, I guess the densification would help reduce, hopefully, well, for sure, urban sprawl, but with what comes with sprawl, with spreading infrastructure. So through OCP land use management, that's one tool. The province of British Columbia has also passed legislation this year which has allowed for single-family dwellings to have up to 4 units within them. So now being somewhat told by the province, we have the ability for single-family dwellings to be converted to 4 units without having to go through a rezoning process. That's a small example, but those are types of things that I think both the province of British Columbia and the municipality are working toward for sure, is densification.
Good afternoon. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of extra information on your debt servicing. Approximately how much of that is interest on existing loans and how much is payback on loans?
I actually wouldn't know those numbers off the top of my head. I can tell you that we do have published numbers of that. So if you, we post our financial statements on our website, and in there at the back, it's called Schedule 5, and it will show a breakdown of all of our debt, what interest rate we pay on the current term, and what the principal payments and interest payments are on each of them. We go through an organization called the Municipal Finance Authority, and so again, I take opportunities to plug organizations like this. So this is a provincial entity, so it's nonprofit, and what they do is they use the collective borrowing power of the entire province to get like AAA rating, the best possible rates that you can get. And then what they do is as we make our debt servicing cost payments, they invest our principal payments, and then if they make money on it, they actually give us what's called a surplus payout. They'll reimburse us a bit at the end of the debt. So we can access very low borrowing percentages, lower than you or I could get, for example, mortgaging our home. And then they also take any of the profits that they might make off of that debt and pay us back with it. So it's really an advantageous way for municipalities to fund infrastructure in this province. And so a lot of people think debt is inherently a bad thing, and I try and tell people that debt is actually sort of a necessary component of how not just this municipality, but everyone in the province funds their infrastructure.
The other thing I'm curious about is what's the status of the natural gas distribution system? Did you guys take that over from the gas companies a few years ago?
That was called what we call a lease-in, lease-out agreement, and it was done with Terracin, which is now Fortis, but it was, and we weren't the only city in the province to do it. I think Kelowna did it, and I think, I'm trying to remember one of the other municipalities, but basically what the deal was is, as I said, we can access borrowing rates that other people can't. So Terracin, when in 2004, what they wanted to do was implement this whole infrastructure system throughout the city, but they knew that we could get better borrowing rates than they could. So we went to the public, we explained the whole deal at the time, and we contracted the debt, owned the infrastructure, and leased it to Terracin. And then Terracin, after 17 years was up, so in 2021, they had the option to purchase the unamortized value of all of that infrastructure back from us And we actually ended up making about $30 million over the course of that 17 years from that deal. But Terracin now owns all that infrastructure, and there's no more leasing going back and forth between us and Terracin.
Could you go back a couple of slides on your presentation? Keep going, please. Yeah, sorry, forward one. The one that, yeah, that one there that shows all the area. I seem to remember back when this was happening that the reason why Prince George grew, or at least one of the reasons it grows so large, was to make sure that it encompassed any local industrial development within city limits. So this was done on purpose. At least that was the explanation at the time when it happened. So why are we holding it up as some kind of a liability now?
I'm not sure I can comment too greatly on that. These two big expansions you see happened in 1974 and 1975. So we feel through our records that we have a decent understanding of why things were done, but if there was some other information floating around back then,
Well, it was to make sure that a lot of local industrial development didn't end up outside the city and thus perhaps paying taxes to the regional district or the province instead of the city.
Yeah, possible. I was born in 1977, so it's hard for me to comment.
But I'm curious as to why why is it suddenly a liability? I mean, don't we have to acknowledge that that was done for a reason, and it's not something that just happened out of the blue?
No, thank you. Just building on what Chris said, this slide, I think, summarizes the thinking from the city's planning department in the mid-70s. Is there was decades of rapid growth. Prince George was a boom town, and the projections from the first OCP was that by this time, Prince George would have more than 200,000 people in it. So to prepare for that growth, looking at the documents from this era, the City Council approached the province to increase the boundaries to accommodate for that projected growth. Now, if everything happened as planned, then we'd be in a much different situation. But as those of us that have lived in Prince George for quite some time know, the growth dramatically stopped in the mid-'80s, early 80s, and that's left us with the scenario that we have now, which is a massive geographic footprint, low-density population, and all the infrastructure that was intended to support 200,000 people being supported by about 80,000.
I do have 3 questions on Slido, and so if we can maybe do those ones. I know it's past 6 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock we're supposed to skip over to the Parks and Trails presentation, but finance is frankly often a lot more interesting, so if we can maybe do these 3. And then if you do have other questions, if you enter them in Slido, we will continue to get the answers and we'll post them on our website. So if you didn't get your question answered tonight, we will put them on the city's website on the Get Involved page. The first question is, what likelihood is there of cutting 5 to 10% of the protective services budget in order to fund infrastructure replacement?
That would be a very large undertaking, and there would be ramifications that I think your council would have to consider with that. We have 4 fire halls in the city, for example. One is near the Y there on Massage. One is on 5th and Ospika, one is in the Hard Highway, and one is in Vanway. And the reason we have these fire halls spread out is, again, kind of back to our infrastructure story. We try and maintain an 8-minute response time to anywhere in the city's limits. And so to try and cut 5 or 10% from the staffing of those fire halls, you would be putting that response time at risk. And there would definitely be public safety outcomes that council would have to consider with that. The RCMP is no different. We try and maintain a certain number of our CMP members to handle whatever our case files might be. And we're already shown to see that we have one of the highest caseloads per member in the province. So to cut from there, again, would have, I think, very big ramifications for the public that council would have to consider.
Thank you. This next one is a two-parter, and I'll read them both for you. Wouldn't densification of our current land use create more issues on our current infrastructure? And then the second part of it is, do we have a plan to utilize more of the City of PG land mass for taxable benefits? So the first part is, if we have a more densification, are we putting more pressure on our infrastructure?
So that's yes, but I think what have to be thought about through that is that we do have infrastructure being subsurface and at surface infrastructure, subsurface being your water, sewer, storm connections and pipes that service our homes. That would be considered through the change in legislation I noted earlier with the previous question, that the province saying we can now have 4 units per home. The city isn't anticipating that all homeowners are going to all of a sudden convert their homes to 4 units to maximize the usage of the site. But should that happen, and should we receive applications that would create more units that are currently a single-family home, we look at things like the servicing to the site. So this is information we review at the time of a building permit, which would be required to convert the house to 4 units or between 2 and 4 units. And we would, I guess, approve that building permit or that improvement based on the technical review of things like servicing. What was the other part of that question? Sorry, Julie, again.
So the first part was, wouldn't it create issues for our current infrastructure? And then, do we have a plan to utilize more of our land mass for taxable benefits?
I'm not sure about the taxable benefits, but just in terms of using more land, we're, again, referring to the OCP, which informs where we want to encourage urban growth. Because we have a very large land mass that we've talked about, but there's significant areas of our large land mass that are developed. Hart Highway, the Bowl, College Heights, and then our Blackburn community. We want to encourage growth in these areas that already see the densification and then further densify. The more we sprawl, the greater we add to the I guess, our servicing, our infrastructure, what has to be maintained, put on our books in terms of managing it from an asset management point of view, and would have to then collect dollars for future maintenance and perhaps replacement of those services. So we do want to see land developed, but in a more, I guess, densified way, so we don't have the sprawl. Sprawl would equate to greater dollars being spent on infrastructure.
Thank you. And that's all the questions I have on Slido. If you do have any other questions specifically about infrastructure, taxes, things like that, you can still submit them and we will get them on our website. But we'll move on now to parks and trails.
Good evening, everyone. As Mr. Babbage said, my name is Blake McIntosh. I'm Director of Civic Operations. Of my working groups, I'm going to give a brief overview on our Parks and Solid Waste Division. Parks and Solid Waste is comprised of 4 main areas: Parks Operations, Parks Recreation Services, Cemeteries, and Solid Waste Services. Parks Operations is basically the bread and butter of what you would consider traditional park maintenance. We look after all the parks, playgrounds, do all the turf maintenance, sports fields, trails, irrigation, pruning, horticulture, those sort of things. Our current responsibilities include 84 parks, 48 playgrounds, and 44 sport field and ball diamonds. Park Recreation Services, staff work with many groups and entities to administer all of our booking needs. So if a sporting group requires Massage Place or a ball field or a soccer field, that group is responsible for booking and scheduling and make sure everyone has generally equal access to all of our facilities. We also work with the community associations through our shared use agreement with School District 57. Obviously, we don't have a lot of vertical assets that are just dedicated to community associations, so we work with the school district to book these facilities and allow community associations to floor hockey, Cub Scouts, badminton, all these other activities. And finally, this group also works with or forms partnerships and agreements with sporting groups such as youth soccer, baseball, lacrosse, cricket, lawn bowling, etc., to ensure that maintenance does occur at the facilities and they get the use that they desire. Third group in this area is cemeteries. So we've got the 2 cemeteries in town, Memorial Park, which is off of Ferry Ave, and also we have the Clytley Tenay Memorial Park Cemetery at Clytley Tenay Memorial Park. Interment options include the traditional burials for both full casket and cremations. And at the ferry location, we have the recently constructed mausoleum, green burials, and a private columbaria. And finally, solid waste services is included in this group, which includes 26,000 residential accounts that are serviced by automated garbage trucks. It's important to note that the city is just responsible for collection and delivery of refuse to the landfill. The regional district manages the landfill, so the city is just the collection for the tax base. And that pretty much sums up the Parks and Solid Waste Division. I just wanted to highlight some of the capital improvements we've made in 2024. The park washroom refurbishment program included washrooms at Clytley Tenay Memorial Park, and you may have noticed along Massey, we're currently refurbishing the washroom at the Jump Start and Lacrosse Court. We've also had a ball diamond sport field renewal capital project that included fencing, dugouts, bleachers, improved lighting at various facilities in town. Tree planting and, hard surface court replacement program. So I think this was a long time coming. We've done a lot of refurbishment of existing basketball courts and tennis courts throughout the city, and this should be an ongoing program, hopefully until we catch up. Tree planting and trail rehab, various sites throughout the downtown, trails along the Heritage River Trail. Anytime we have a ornamental tree that gets perhaps hit with a motor vehicle or destroyed, we're replacing those through this program as well. And we have the Connaught Hill Park enhancement, so that's an exciting project, I think, for a lot of people. New pergola and accessible staircase was constructed this year. So what we're trying to do is enhance the destination for photographs and weddings for Connaught Hill Park, so I think that will be well used. And finally, the Carrie Jane Gray Park Master Plan concept. So we had a consultant look at the overall Carrie Jane Gray area, and what we're trying to do is really expand and establish that corridor for recreation. So we've come up with some conceptual ideas as far as sport fields and rejigging of the layout of that area just behind the fire hall and such, hoping it can be a centralized location for the city's recreation activities and then something everyone can be proud of. Basically, that sums up my presentation for that area. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just wondering, you guys are, you do the cemetery part, right? I'm just wondering, Is there a connection between the coroner service and the after hospital with you guys at all, or is that a completely different department?
I don't know. Oh, sorry. There's no, I don't think we play a role in that. As far as the booking and preparation for the site and the ceremonial burial, that's what our responsibilities are.
Oh, okay. Just you don't have any like instructional training going towards the coroners in any way? That hasn't been asked for? Any kind of sensitivity training at all?
Well, our staff,
Not for your end, but for on the more hospital medical side.
yeah, that would be out of our role.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go ahead then. Quick question, I'm not sure if this would go to you or to engineering services, but we'll start with you because you're here. Shirella Park, or half of Shirella Park, is a muddy hole in the ground that got weed whacked, as far as I can tell, maybe once last year. I've contacted the city on numerous occasions asking about when they're either going to, A, have the property developer or the original property developer put the park in that was supposed to be there, or take the money that they claimed that they held back in order to do it. But it's been 2 years and something now. I'm just kind of curious as to what the timeline is for dealing with situations like that.
Sorry, Shirella Park?
Yes, in Shirella Gardens, one of your subdivisions.
Yeah, I recognize that. I'm not, I didn't realize there was an undeveloped park there, to be honest.
You're the parks guy.
What area of town is this in?
Shirella Gardens.
So we do have representatives from the service center here outside in the foyer, and you say you have requested, you phoned the city about this before. Perhaps during a break, if you wouldn't mind going out to the foyer to the desk there, 311 service, our friendly service reps there would be happy to take your request, and we would be able to follow up with you then in response to that and get back to you directly,
Okay,
if that
I'm just
helps.
somewhat surprised you weren't even aware you owned it.
I didn't say I wasn't aware we didn't own it. I was surprised there was an undeveloped park in Shirella Gardens, given the subdivision's been established for a long time.
Yeah, it was a recent addition onto the back of it over the last 3 years. Part of that was supposed to add on to the park. The park add-on part is, yeah, just a
Okay.
weedy, muddy field with garbage in it.
Okay.
Well, we have numerous areas that are zone park that aren't developed, that we haven't, I guess, created a neighborhood park, such as University Heights. I'm currently working on developing a park in Chancellor Park, so.
But it was part of the original subdivision plan that we were handed back in the day, along with a few other things that maybe I could ask somebody else about. But yeah, there was a plan. There was a park was supposed to be developed by somebody, either the subdivision developer or the city at some point. That's what I've been told by various people I've talked to, including people at the city. But I'm just curious as to when anything's likely to happen.
Thank you very much. And as it may said, we'd encourage you to go to the table at the front for the 311 service center, and we'd be happy to take your request there and have staff get back to you. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. A couple of questions. One just about trees, like trees in the medians along the road, like coming down Highway 16 into the gateway that have died and have been removed. Is there a plan to eventually replace those trees, maybe with a hardier type of tree? I noticed in Kelowna they've got pine trees planted in medians. I don't know if maybe that's a reasonable option for Prince George. Also in some of the parks like Duchess Park, Freeman Park, trees that have died have been removed, and I'm just wondering if there's a plan to replace those as well?
Obviously, we try to replace trees. With regards to the Highway 16 corridor, I would have to look into that because being that's a ministry roadway, city staff may not be maintaining those trees, but arterials such as Ospika, Tabor, definitely those would be under our responsibility, and should the trees need replacement, they'd be replaced. Staff generally look at the value of the replacement tree, say Freeman Park. If there's a need for it, we would definitely replace it, but if it's aged out naturally and it's seen the end of its life cycle, we would probably have to have more conversations.
These are newly planted trees I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah, well, if it's a newly planted tree by the city and it hasn't been successful, we definitely look at replacing that through our tree replacement program.
Okay, thanks. Can I make one more, a quick comment and another question. The quick comment is, I noticed at Duchess Park, a lot of the bark was chewed off around the base of trees that were dead. And I also have noticed staff using a weed whacker to get the grass around the base of the trees. I don't know if that's damaging the trees, but I just thought I would mention it. The other question was about the Heritage River Trail. Is there a plan to keep developing that trail? Like there's that section with the old Winton headquarters there, where the trail is discontinuous, and then like the derelict pavement that was never removed along the banks of the river there. That said, I do think it was a really good job that was done in putting in the new crushed rock trail, but I'm just wondering if there's a plan for more work.
There's no immediate plan for refurbishment of that trail. Obviously, we appreciate the comments about transitioning from the asphalt to the granular. Several years ago, there was a project to armor the banks, and we were all ready to go, but the costs of the environmental offsets that the ministry required far outweighed the value of the project, so we put that on pause. Ideally, we would like to enhance that area and reestablish the trails, but the erosion issue is a challenge to us right now.
We have 3 questions online. The first one is, are there plans to build a bike pump track? And if there is, would it be attached to the existing BMX track?
There's no immediate plans for a bike pump track. We have heard interest over the last 2 years in that, so that's something we could consider. Maybe a little difficult given the condensed footprint by the skate park. So ideally maybe in the Carrick-Jane region, if it's feasible.
Another question is, would the user groups have to pay for any of the moves at Carrick-Jane Gray Park? And when would the moves begin to happen?
Currently, we're just in the conceptual stage. There's significant discussion and presentation to council over a number of years that would occur. Obviously, funding and fiscal responsibility and council approval would play into that. So we're just in its infancy right now.
And the last one that I have is, what are the chances of the Carrick-Jane Gray Park master plan actually happening?
Well, if I were to think positively, that would be great. But as I mentioned, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a concept. It's something that we felt needed to be done. There needs to be some sort of structure in order to improve things, and this was our first step at looking what could be done there.
We've got a few more minutes to talk about parks. Does anybody else in the room have a question about our parks or our trails? Blake is also the expert in all things solid waste, if you want to talk about garbage. He loves to talk trash. Pardon me? We got 5 more minutes.
why is solid waste and parks in the same department?
It's just always been that way. I mean, my portfolio is basically public works, so solid waste fits into public works. Parks is kind of a unique division because there are recreational components to it, but there's also operational components to it as well. So parts of it could be in the old, what they used to call community services, where they were doing all the booking and all the parks booking, where operationally we did all the maintenance. So at some point it was all combined and solid waste was juggled in there.
Anybody else? Oh, no, sorry, I will run over. Because there's people watching online and they won't hear you if I don't give you the mic.
I was wondering if this, with the garbage and solid waste had worked with the BC wildlife people at all to help with the bear problem. Like, we got lots of bears. I don't think we're going to run out of bears anytime soon, but it does seem a shame to kill off some 60 or 70 of them every year.
So, ironically enough, there was a bear committee formed by council. On November 4th, a report is going to council with recommendations from that committee. So yes, we have worked with several organizations to look at the bear challenges within the city of Prince George.
Was there somebody? I think this woman.
It's not a question, it's just a comment for the last about the bears. Coming to the city, a lot of it has to do with our local citizens and their yard waste, not maintaining their properties, the fruit and all that stuff. Because I've run into a bear recently in the spring. That's pretty scary when you can't see, so. It's not really a city thing, it's a resident thing as well.
Well, there's definitely an accountability component for those people contributing or paying for garbage collection. Ideally, your garbage is either strapped down or put in a protective enclosure so that bears can access it.
I don't have any more questions online. Do we want to move along and start talking about roads and snow? We love to talk about snow.
Yes, I'm still here. So also as part of my portfolio is snow, everyone's favorite topic as we're approaching that time of year. So snow removal is addressed based on criteria that's outlined in a council-approved snow and ice control policy. There's generally some important factors that govern the way we administer the policy and do snow removal. First off, our thresholds. So for what we call a snow event, which is basically all city forces and contracted forces address a certain level of accumulation, and we have a time frame to accomplish that by. Priority 1 and 2 routes, which are basically collectors and arterials, Ospika, 15th Avenue. When the threshold hits 7.5 centimeters within 24 hours, that's our mandate to full go and make sure that those roads are safe and passable within 48 hours. Moving on to priority 3, which are generally residential roads, the threshold's 12 centimeters. So subsequent to the priority 1 and 2 clearing, we move into residential and we have 72 hours to make those roads safe and passable. That's really it in a nutshell. Outside of snow events, we do winter maintenance with our own staff and equipment, includes sidewalks, applications of traction materials at slippery intersections, de-icing materials such as salt or liquid brine. And there's not much. I mean, this year's budget was approximately $10.3 million. And yeah, that's about as sexy as I can get with snow. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to provide any information you require.
There was one comment that slipped through about parks that I missed, and it's not a question, but I'm going to read it out loud anyway because I have a microphone. Just a general thank you for all of the work done to create and maintain so much green space in the city. It's pretty rad.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Roads.
Thank you. I've been a resident of Prince George since 1964 and a homeowner since 1984 in the same neighborhood. I have observed in the last couple of years the plows coming down my street when there is no snow, creating a lot of sparks. I have phoned the city to ask why they are there clearing the snow when there is no snow. So I would wonder how much that impacts the budget when you're wasting time clearing snow that isn't on the roads. I got told the reason they were doing that was to open up the drainage ditches. They did not open up a single drainage ditch. We have ongoing problems in the DP Todd area with backup in a couple of places because the road is graded towards the drains, but they're not cleared. We have a neighbor that she's quite exuberant about this and spends a lot of time clearing those herself, and I'm sure she causes some problems for the city. I know she does. I'm just curious to know why they're out plowing when there's no snow. The other thing I have is next to me and on my street, we have 3 walkways. They don't clear the walkways. I take my snowblower and I blow out the walkways, and I've seen the plows come along and block them in completely and drive away. I've had to go find a supervisor to say, please get them to come back to clear the walkway, because we've got children that have to now climb over that mountain of ice and snow and then land on the street where they could be hit by a car. So I don't think we do as good a job as we could be doing, and I think there's a lot of money wasted. Well,
I apologize for you having to experience that. It's unfortunate. Leaving the windrows in front of walkways, yeah, that shouldn't happen, so that's something I'll bring back to staff. As far as the grading of bare roads, at times we do cut ice to try to expose the gutter. I'm not saying that that's what was occurring, but that's something else I'll bring back. But when there's compact and we get into the cycles where we're starting to thaw, we try to cut some of the ice near the gutter to open up the catch basins or make it easier for utility crews to steam them and allow them to accept the runoff.
Just a further comment on the sidewalks. I walk to work, and often the sidewalks are blocked by snow removed from the street, forcing me to walk on the road. When I reached out to the city, the response I received is the sidewalk is a city right-of-way, and we are free to use it for storage if needed. Is that true?
Generally, no. There must be some misconception or mistake there, because sidewalk areas are generally a one-way plow, which means they're plowed from the sidewalk side to the opposite side of the road, or if there's sidewalks on both sides, they're plowed to the middle. So there shouldn't be any areas where we're burying sidewalks. I'm not sure. It would be nice to know what area that was.
Edmonton and 5th, I believe.
Yeah, we don't maintain a sidewalk that's not curb adjacent if they're offset, which means if they're offset from the gutter into the property, those ones are too difficult for us to maintain because there's snow on both sides, and then it generally starts to melt and freeze thaw and creates ice and causes us issues. So we just maintain curb adjacent sidewalks.
Okay. Yeah, it's a safety issue, so it would be great to work with engineers or whoever you need to keep sidewalks clear and stop forcing pedestrians to walk on the road.
I will just say that the offset sidewalks, we've worked hard to, with our new sidewalk budget or rehab budget, to move them from offset to curb adjacent so we can maintain them a lot easier.
Just a quick comment to add to that. I think I know the sidewalk he's talking about, and it was where snow had pushed, or where plows had pushed the snow into a big bank right at the end of the sidewalk. Okay. So it wasn't that they didn't clear the sidewalk as much as actively blocked it off.
Okay, well, I would appreciate if you guys, if that occurred, just call 311 and we would definitely get that rectified.
That was the email response that he read at the beginning, was emailing the city to let them know about it and them replying that they can use sidewalks as they please for storage if they want.
Okay, I'll look into that.
So we've been hearing lots of stories about bad snow removal, and I just wanted to say that I live about halfway between here and between the city and the heart, and you've been doing a great job plowing the snow there. It is true that the taxi I was trying to take back to my house from the airport couldn't make it up the hill, but I find that to be acceptable. So if you want to plow that area worse, I'd be okay with that.
You guys stack the snow up in big piles and here and there about town for most of the winter. I was wondering if there were any long-term plans on meltwater, and as far as that goes, stormwater remediation before it's dumped into the disposal system, which ultimately ends up in the Fraser River. Like currently now, I noticed things like ditches and drainages are all mostly carefully lined with bits of broken concrete or other things to prevent erosion, but don't do much to remediate the water that we're actually dumping back into the Fraser River ultimately.
We don't have a filtering system to remediate the water. The meltwater goes into the storm system and goes into the Fraser River. It's just part of our collection system. And as far as the broken concrete goes, that was maybe standards back in 1970, but that doesn't occur anymore.
I'm not worried, complaining about the broken concrete. I'm just mentioning that it's there on the ditches to prevent erosion, presumably, but it basically turns them into little funnels that just don't do anything for the water quality. I was just curious if there was ever likely to be any plans about tackling water remediation, wastewater, stormwater, and meltwater remediation.
Well, depending on if it's a surface collection in a ditch, there is some remediation through the vegetation. The pipe system, there is no system that will filter it. That would be a large capital project we would have to look at.
Oh, I do have one online. Would property taxes be decreased if we shoveled our own sidewalks?
But it doesn't address that. Yes, they would, but I don't think it would be significant as to lower the snow levy. You know, it would be dollars for each residential contribution. We basically have 4 sidewalk machines that address approximately 200 kilometers of sidewalk. So, I mean, there would be a savings, but it's not going to reduce the snow budget by $1 million or something like that.
I just got another one. A lot of effort seems to go into road rehabilitating, but it seems the sidewalks get neglected. How do you balance your budget allocation for each area?
So, can I move into the next slide? Ironically, it's roads and sidewalks here. So, it's, Mr. Diallo can probably help me out a little bit with this, but it's a matter of the funding sources. So there is a road levy, which is a separate taxation that's just dedicated specifically to road rehabilitation. It's not, it doesn't go to paving or creating brand new roads or converting gravel roads to pavement. It's just, if there's an asphalt road that's degraded, end of its life, we're renewing it, that's what that fund goes to. We have a capital program for rehabilitating existing sidewalks, and we also have a capital program for new sidewalks. So they're all different pots of money, and we can only spend them on what their designated use is. Rehab to existing has to be spent to rehab to existing sidewalks. I can't use that money to reinvest, say, $1 million of that into new sidewalks. That's how it works.
Does anybody else in the room have questions about roads, sidewalks, snow?
Thanks for fielding all the questions here on the hot seat today. Just wondering if there's any plan to expand cycling infrastructure on the roads, particularly protected cycling infrastructure.
I will address the first part. We always are looking to expand the cycling network through Ms. Wozniak's group's work on the OCP, and we have a capital project on the updating the active transportation plan for 2025, so that will help formulate some of those needs and possibilities for expanding the network. With regards to the protected option, that's always a tough one because we go back to snow, and a lot of our winter temporary storage for the windrows is unfortunately in some of the bike lanes. Having separated protected bike lanes would be a challenge for us seasonally. Not saying that it's not an option or potentially there. Also, some of the challenges for us are, given the age of our existing arterials and widths, we would have to acquire land, move hydro poles, utilities, which would be significant dollars as well. So it's a process, not that we're against it or roadblocking it, it's just going to take time.
I have another question online. I heard something once about Environment Canada mandating what sort of paint we can use on the roads. Is that true?
That is true. Forgive me if my years are a little bit out, but I believe it was about 2009, Environment Canada started limiting the concentrations of VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, within paint. So mid-2000s, we still had oil-based paint, which would last seasonally. Now it's all water-based paint, and that's just the regulations that Environment Canada has put upon across Canada, all municipalities. So unfortunately, in our environment where we have a lot of traction material seasonally, which acts as sandpaper, it wears out the paint, and it's just something that we have to deal with. We've kind of tried pilot areas. Last year, we applied thermoplastic on 15th from the bypass up to Quinn. So if you guys drive that, you'll notice that it lasts a lot longer. The only issue is it's about 6 to 8 times more expensive per meter than regular paint. So we're just trying to better areas that traditionally wear over the winter with these types of products to kind of overcome those challenges.
Does that paint that you said that you had tried, does it last 6 to 8 times longer?
I would say no. Given our snow removal practices, it's pretty tough. Like thermoplastic in Tawasin versus thermoplastic in Prince George is two different scenarios.
Thanks, that was my question. I was curious. We still have time to talk about roads and snow. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, sorry, I have another one online. Is it legal, this might be outside your area of expertise, is it legal to ride a scooter on city sidewalks? Can we get electric scooters?
I can't really speak to the Motor Vehicle Act, but we did have a presentation to council recently that was looking towards the city participating in a pilot program with the ministry and giving feedback on those sorts of things. So possibly it could be legal. Ideally, sidewalks should be just for pedestrians. So we would prefer bike lanes if they are, utilizing those type of motorized.
And I'm assuming they're talking about the ones that you see in some cities where it's a teenager
it's an
usually
electric
standing on the scooters we used to have as kids, not the mobility devices.
No, we're talking about, like, I think what they would refer to as a kick scooter that's electric and goes 35 miles an hour down the sidewalk kind of thing.
Are there any other questions in the room?
Would it be a consideration to, back to bike lanes, because I get around by bike as my mode of transportation year-round, to remove lanes from roads that are built for more cars than are used? Like, for example, I'm thinking Tabor Boulevard, Queensway, for example. And is there any data or information to back up the necessity of having a 4-lane road dedicated to cars if it often seems like there's not that many cars on the road?
I mean, I think that's something that could be considered in the future. Obviously, there's a lot of data collection and traffic impact studies that would need to occur. I think part of the challenges are the peak times, what Prince George endures as a rush hour, morning and evening. Limiting or reducing those lanes would definitely impact those times of commute. But yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Some of those roads have existed for 50 years, and I think it would have to be equal for groups. If there's 3,000 cars versus 20 cyclists, that's a tough one.
I don't have anything online right now. Does anybody in the room have a comment or a question?
When thinking about to invest in car-centered infrastructure or bike lanes, it's important to remember that people are not, these aren't necessarily fixed categories. People do look at our bike infrastructure and think, am I willing to risk my life by riding a bike, or am I just going to drive a car? So there is definitely a factor where improving bike infrastructure will make there be more bikes. I don't ride a bike because I don't want to be riding outside with traffic on the highway. That doesn't seem safe.
I would just like to clarify, there's no bias to motorized vehicles or traditional cars as forms of transportation. I just have to do and look at what's best for the whole, right? Like there's a significant tax base here and everyone has their interests, and I just have to try to balance that. Thank you.
Sorry, Blake, I just got 2 more online, and we still have 11 minutes to talk about roads and snow before we move on to protective services. Has the city applied for an active transportation infrastructure grant? And if not, why not?
I would have to look into that to see if staff have applied for that grant. As I mentioned, the active transportation plan is in the 2025 capital plan for updating.
Does the city have plans to replace plows or other trucks with electric ones?
We've had conversations about that, but I think the general populace needs to recognize that we are a 24-hour operation with 3 shifts during winter. There'd be no time to charge these electric vehicles.
We do have an electric Zamboni, though, don't we, Andy? We have an electric Zamboni, though, don't we? Yeah.
I will say that we are looking at hybrid vehicles, which generates electricity. We've got potentially our heavy side on equipment, some loaders that we've piloted and with great success, so we're looking at that for future ways to reduce our carbon footprint.
If street lighting is inside your portfolio, can you speak to a potential solution where the lighting falls, on the opposite side of the street to the sidewalks?
I'm not sure what that's referencing. We have 2 styles of lights. We have post tops, which is the light that's straight at the top, and then we have the davits, which are like the cobras that come over. So if there's an issue with where the light is pointed, or they feel that it could be adjusted, they could just put a service request in and we can have the electricians look at that.
This obviously got somebody else interested in lights. Does the city ever look at installing LED lights to save money on lighting the streets?
We've done a big retrofit program. You probably noticed that most of our lights are LED now. Anytime there's the old halogen ones, we're replacing them with LEDs. There is maybe a view on some of the hydro lease lights, so those would be lights on hydro wooden poles. We pay for the electricity to power those lights in certain subdivisions. A lot of them are still the old halogen style lights, but when there is maintenance done, I believe hydro is replacing them with LEDs.
I think this one was put here just to see if I would read it. Thank you for all of your hard work. You da best. But there is actually also a question. Is there really much that can be done about bears other than strapping down our garbage cans? What else should citizens be doing?
Well, obviously, strapping down the cans is one option. Locking your can up is another option. You know, maybe there is some gaps as far as recycling goes, but food waste, recycling, and composting is a challenge for the regional district as well. Given that they've invested significant dollars in their natural gas recapturing at the Foothills landfill, they want that feedstock so they can keep producing natural gas, but it's just being diligent in securing your garbage. That's all we can do at this point.
I do not have anything else online.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody in the room happy? Would we like to talk about protective services? It's a smidgy bit early for protective services, but I think we're safe to move along.
Drop in the papers. Green is forward, red is back. There we go. I think we got all the instructions together. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Eric Depno, Director of Administrative Services, which includes a lot of our uniformed groups in the City of Prince George. We're going to take you through a few slides to show file counts for the departments to help add some context to the budget numbers you're hearing here this evening. Share a little bit, I think, about what we're hearing and what we're thinking, right? This is informing the budget process, so what is it that we see as a need going forward? And then we'll have some time to take a number of questions and look forward to those. So our department really appears on two budget lines. That's protective services, and within the much smaller extent, general government, and that's our communications and government relations part, versus police, fire, emergency services, bylaw, emergency management. So looking first at the RCMP, on the left, we have consistent file counts with around 46,000 files per year over the last 5 years. So as mentioned earlier, a very high file count, a very high file count per individual. It's a busy detachment serving a large area. The detachment serves both the city of Prince George and the rural area around us. We have a 5-year staffing plan that is informed by a detachment review from a few years ago, and we're entering year 3 of that plan. Generally, the plan has us on track to consider adding around 4 RCMP members per year over the next few years. In this conversation, we've heard a lot about the need for community policing, and that capability is certainly something that's considered when we look at what's coming up in the future and what we want to propose. If you're interested in seeing that police service review, we do have copies out on the tables outside, and there's a QR code there if you want to scan or take a photo and take that away with you. On the right, we have data for individuals taken into care and custody at our local cells. Over 2019 to 2024, the number fluctuated between roughly 2,600 and 3,200 individuals taking part in that service. In 2024, we're already at 3,071 as of about a few weeks ago, and I was personally shocked by that number, just the volume of folks that are engaging in the criminal justice system there. And if the trend continues, we are on track to have a record volume of individuals take part in that service. We've recently received recommendations about how we can improve ourselves, and so we're looking forward to having a due consideration on those in the coming days. So again, it's a very busy detachment, and I think folks will have seen, Prince George RCMP ought to be congratulated. Recently, a few weeks back, had their largest drug bust in the city's history. So a very busy department, a lot of folks working very hard, and we are seeing some successes. Turning to bylaw, which includes our general duty officers, parking, and animal control. Our bylaw officers generally enforce city bylaws that have been put in place to improve the quality of living in Prince George for our residents and visitors alike. The most common bylaws our officers handle are ones relating to animal care and control and parking. Two things that receive a lot of attention, right? We love our fur babies, and we are always angry when we don't find that parking spot close enough. So those are certainly hot topics. On the left, over the last 6 years, bylaw responses have ranged from nearly 6,000 files in 2021 at a high point, down lower to around 2,600. We credit some of the decrease in recent years it's a lot about education, it's about proactive communication. The goal is to achieve compliance and through education, it's not to ticket. And so we're seeing some success there, we think. We do have a bylaw table out in the lobby again with more information, and there's some great leaflets on some of the common bylaw files if you'd like to take those away with you here tonight. On the right side, animal control responses, very consistent with roughly 1,500 responses each year. Looking forward in this part of the department, we hear comments about the need to work on the general safety and state of our downtown. And this is a multi-department effort, but we do see the department taking a leadership role in addressing some of these issues. We like to caution that we're only speaking for what the municipality can do, and that housing, addiction, mental health treatment are all provincial issues that we simply can't address alone. And so, again, a lot of advocacy through the intergovernmental function and through council and at different touch points. As an example of local leadership on this file, though, where the city is taking action, we have a parking review project that's set to start in the next few months. The goal is to return a report on how the city can modernize parking in the downtown, and this gives us a great opportunity to really look at the feedback and stories that we've heard about safety and cleanliness of some of our owned and leased parking spaces and parkades. And if you're here tonight, I just want to thank those that have helped provide their experience and feedback in one form or another to help inform that work. Finally, looking at the fire rescue service, we just want to highlight that this is an all hazards response department. The 2023 pie chart on the right highlights the main categories of response, where each category is then broken down into numerous specific incident types. So these include rescue responses such as confined space, hazmat, auto extrication, high angle, water ice, biking, hiking incidents, you name it. It also includes medical calls in support of BC Ambulance, which is a large chunk there, 6,646 calls. Of course, fire fights fire, not only structural and residential, but also wildland vehicles too, depending on the circumstances. And fire also has an important job in conducting fire inspections and investigations here in the city of Prince George. Looking forward, there's lots of really exciting things on the horizon, we think, within the department, but recognizing the compounding effects of the toxic drug crisis, an aging population, and health system pressures generally means the department is responding to a high number of medical calls. And we want to ensure that we're deploying appropriate, cost-effective resources to ensure that when you call 911, the most appropriate resources are arriving. And so the department is working hard to figure out how to staff a medical response vehicle, which would cut down on larger vehicles being deployed on some of these calls. We also remain open to partnership and want to take the opportunity to thank Miracle Theatre and everyone who had a role in donating a structural suppression unit to the City of Prince George, which we recently took receipt of. Again, it's another busy department, and as you can see from the slide volumes there, generally that's only increasing. We're not seeing a dip. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions on any of the parts of protective services. Seeing one, just waiting for the mic to get you.
Hi. I was just wondering what kind of systems and plans would you have for incorporating public safety services that include afterlife care, because there's no legislation across Canada for anybody in the position doing body recovery or transportation. That job has no safety coverage at all, and it's not a job going away anywhere.
I can't say we have much that I'm familiar with the afterlife care aspect. I'm not sure what the municipality's roles and responsibilities in that space might be, but it's something that's been raised here tonight, so happy to take that away and explore it a bit further, but apologies I don't have more info. Look into the mic, sir.
I was wondering if the city had any long-term and large-scale plans for wildfire prevention, not prevention of the fires themselves, but prevention of the fire, say, moving through the entire city. There's information out from the city and the province on what to do if you have a place in our sort of a rural city interface lots and things like that. But does the city have an overarching plan for stopping a massive wildfire from just sweeping, say, in from the east or the west or whatever direction and moving through the entire city? Are we looking at quartering the city up, following highways, and looking at how we can build massive fire breaks to stop a big fire from moving through the entire city?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The emergency management angle, I think, is really interesting, and there's just so many parts that go into it, right, depending on where that ignition starts. And so just yesterday in this space down the hall, there was a wildfire roundtable where we bring together the province, BC Timber Sales, the municipality, the regional district, and so on, and they do share information about how all of those overarching plans integrate together. And so I suppose I would say that there wouldn't be one large individual plan, but there would be dozens of supporting plans around how we do evacuations of different areas, of how different agencies are going to link into that plan to deal with folks who maybe have mobility issues or particular health issues during an evacuation. There's wildfire mitigation pieces in different neighborhoods or interface areas. So for sort of massive fire breaks, I don't think that's something that I'm familiar with being in the cards at the moment, but both the preparedness, response, recovery, there is ongoing planning, there's tabletop exercises, and thankfully we haven't had to experience it here, but we are learning from what we're seeing elsewhere and supporting those responses. We received a number of people from Jasper this year as an example, but also we're able to deploy resources to support Williams Lake. And so the short answer, I don't believe an overarching individual plan would exist, but it is a topic that every day we have a department led by Ms. Tanya Spooner, and there's a lot of work happening there. and she would be very happy to connect with you to chat more. Thank you, Tanya.
I have 4 questions online, but I am keeping an eye on you. If you put your hand up, I'm happy to run to you. The first question online is, what money has been spent on community policing, and what did we get for that money?
So when we look at the 2022 detachment review, community policing is identified as an area that has been flagged for significant resourcing. How we do that is, I guess, again, multifaceted. So the City of Prince George has a contract with the RCMP to provide that protective service. We provide through council, through staff, comments about the priority, about how that ought to be allocated, and then from there the day-to-day operation is looked after by the RCMP. And so as mentioned, we've heard that there's a desire for increased capacity in community policing, and so that's something we're taking into these ongoing conversations with our contract partner. In terms of what we're getting for it, you know, I think we are seeing a very challenging, wicked problem, and we do see a great number of responses. And so if we look at the STRIVE program as an example, an intervention program for youth, that's a multi-million-dollar funding investment through the federal government, so not community policing specifically, but an after-school program in support of a community policing function as one example. So we're receiving great programming, and it'll take time to know what those end results are as we deter folks from entering a path in life that could be worse than the one they're on.
Another question is, will the city stop spending millions for other level of government's responsibility like health, housing, etc., and focus on their own responsibilities? I don't know if the person who asked this maybe wants to be specific about if there's a project they think we did. I'm not sure if you can answer this one.
So broadly speaking, you know, those jurisdictional questions, we enter with the slide about who does what for a reason. And so downloading is something that I think as the City of Prince George Council is very sensitive to, ensuring tax dollars are spent on services that are within the mandate of the municipal government, and staff are aware of that pressure as well. And so it's something that we're constantly guarding against. It's something that we push back through the intergovernmental function, again, UBCM, FCM, or otherwise, to make sure that those who ought to be spending money on those services are. But that being said, there are also areas where there's very clear need and reason to partner. And so to look at any one example, the city has a role to play, and I think there's an expectation from folks that we are an active partner trying to solve some of these problems. And so if the province comes with a proposed partnership and part of that partnership makes sense inside the municipal mandate, then I think that's something that we look at.
Are there stats on the crime downtown that residents can get access to?
Yes, and I'm actually going to ask yourself. There was an open source crime piece back to 2021 that I know you had shared with me, and so I'm familiar with that being open source, Googleable. I'm familiar with Blockwatch statistics as example. They report break and enters across the province, so that's available. And I suppose I'll pause there, but just say that yes, those resources are available.
On the city's website, which is princegeorge.ca, if you click on, going by memory, city services, and then one of those tabs says fire police, it's the fire police one you want, and there's a portal in there that shows a map of the city, and it shows all of the property crime. Enter the dates that you're interested in, and it will show the number of property crime incidents in any particular area you're interested in. And the RCMP keep that up to date. It's really very cool. So if you're thinking of buying property in a neighborhood, you can check out the property crime first.
Hi, I'm just wondering, for protection services, what kind of protection services do you have or are trying to implement for people who are unhoused? Because they're still citizens of this city and Canada and all that, and they deserve the protection. And stuff like putting in the equivalent of an after-school program or a drop-in center, those are available things that you said that are programming that can happen, so they can be happening on other scales, right? And then we have that new legislation that was mentioned where you can have residential residential properties split up into 4 units. I do believe it was mentioned that the city does own some residential properties. Is there any kind of services protecting like that going in?
Thank you for that question, right? So it's one of the pieces that I often talk about, or that we need to have thoughtful and compassionate responses, because like you said, we're all in this. And so perhaps I'll go through some of our functions. And so when I look at our emergency management function, a big part of that work is looking at extreme heat and extreme cold spaces and those type of services. So through protective services, through emergency management, certainly our vulnerable populations receive a lot of consideration in how we're staffing those programs, either end of that scale, as well as services, if there's hardship experienced, a house fire or otherwise, is another piece where we can intervene. Looking at the fire side, so there's the direct medical response and support that folks are receiving. There's also a lot of education, and so when we are talking about folks who are perhaps sheltering in the authorized areas in the city, fire's often engaging to do some relationship building and share information about burning and what the hazards can be. Of course, tragically, we've seen a lot of tiny home structures or improvised structures with fires, right? And we don't want to see anybody be hurt or injured. Turning to bylaw, we have the outreach function, so that is supporting other functions such as BC Housing and getting folks into shelter, the tenanting offers and so on. But there's also a municipal function where they're supporting our programming and our work through things like the Safety Hub, situation table, where we come together as agencies to try to respond to individual needs. And so on. So it doesn't receive a lot of airtime, I think, but in each of those functions, there's a lot of thoughtful and compassionate responses that the city is trying to support those folks, again, to have that full life.
It did snow this morning, and it's getting cold, right? Like, people do need places, and if there are available places you can put them,
Why not use those units that are available with the legislation available?
Yeah, so the question was making use of available spaces and trying to make sure that there's capacity for folks to get indoors. It's getting cold. And so one of the ways that we do that is flow through funding from the province, and so the city can receive that and support through third parties. So again, in Miss Spooner's area, but there's existing network of partnerships, and we hope to have some more coming online. Yeah, a very much needed piece.
So I apologize if this is too much of a pointed question or you can't answer it, but how safe is it to, like, in your opinion, to like walk around as a pedestrian in like the downtown area after night? Like, is it reckless for me to walk home? Or is this like, or I guess that's the question, sorry.
I think there's a subjective piece, right? How people feel is their reality, and so we hear that people feel unsafe, and so we need to do things to help address that. But what I'll say is these occurrences are not unique to the city. They're across the province, they're across the country, they permeate into other spaces. And so when we look at the crime statistics as some empirical sources, we see a bit of a dip in some of the property crime. We see glimmers of statistics moving in the right directions. And so how folks are feeling is something we need to address. We take it seriously, but I suppose that's my answer.
Did you hear her?
Forgive me, I only heard part of it, but access to affordable shelter, I think, was part of it.
No, it had nothing to do with shelter. I was ranting about how can there be change and difference for the vacancies, how are we bringing the work to bring the people in to work, right? There's no work out there. It's supposed to say the year 2000, 2001, right?
So you're talking about creating jobs?
Well, something's got to be done to keep people busy, to get back stabilized, because it's not just mentally unwell people, because even people I knew that were at the top, boom, they're at the bottom too. People I wouldn't even imagine are in the gutter, and I don't judge them.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of challenges out there, right? Whether it's the cost of living, whether it's the availability of work, whether it's the some of the housing pressures. And so again, back to the municipality trying to be a partner in addressing some of those pieces. The curves that we're experiencing far bigger than what's happening just locally. But the city hears the frustration, and we understand that is coming from a very real place. And anywhere we can address it, I think we're looking for opportunities to do so. In protective services, I mentioned a few of the areas, but I appreciate the feedback.
Try it. Yeah, he's not getting it. He's circles, circles. No, government, circles, circles. Agencies, circles, circles. Look, I'm looking for the outdoor. I'm stable. I'm blind. I'm not mental. I'm not argumentative. I'm advocating, self-advocating, because I ain't had no one here for me since 2007. Okay. It hasn't gotten any better with services. Oh, do this, do that, da, 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 kickback. Oh, do it all over again. Oh, try a different way, but do it the same way. Yeah, no, no.
Let's go. Where's the outdoor? You're pointed toward it right now. Perfect.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. We appreciate the comments.
I have a question online. Can someone patrol downtown more so people don't light fires?
So looking first part of the question just on, pardon, I should have brought up another bucket of water. First part of the question around additional patrols in the downtown. And so there's lots of energy, lots of conversation around how we make space more secure. There is a new standing committee on public safety that's investigated a little bit into that conversation. One of the things that we think about when we are looking to put more eyes out on the streets is it's really an observe and report function that's being talked about often with security doing patrols. And so that observing and reporting is feeding back to the same other services who are then having the action. And so sort of limited benefit is generally what we're seeing through that service. And so what do we do instead? You know, there's been conversation at the committee level around additional CCTV and third party working to try to get eyes out there at all times through those technological resources versus foot patrols, which you know, have a smaller coverage. So that's one comment. On the fire piece, a lot of work going into helping keep problem areas where we see those challenges happening, trying to remove the fuel hazards, trying to remove the burning material. In June, I believe it was, there was talk about investigating additional recycling programs, looking at pallets, looking at cardboard, looking at tires. And so it's not things that will happen immediately, and the behavior that's underlying, if it's driven by survival in terms of the weather, then there's other resources that have to be brought to bear to address it. But we are looking at enhanced security. We are looking at trying to reduce the hazards, and it's certainly a known issue multiple departments are looking at.
I've got one more question online, and then I'll come over to you, sir. How will the 2025 budget for protective services prioritize safety improvements, and what metrics will be used to gauge success in these areas?
So looking at the enhancements that we are proposing for the 2025 budget, we talked a little bit in the notes about how that community policing function is something that we've heard a lot of feedback about, and so that'll be something that we certainly bring to those discussions, looking to reinforce those pieces. Again, you know, operationally, the RCMP have a lot of input there about what they're seeing day to day. On the bylaw side, there's an energy to transition to an overnight sheltering model versus entrenched encampments. And so that would be another way that we'd be prioritizing safety, both for those individuals who are in precarious circumstances and the neighborhoods around them, depending on the location. The metrics pieces, you know, there's frequent reporting. There are tenanting options we could look at, for example, with BC Housing, how many folks accepted offers, how many folks moved into shelter. Other metrics, you know, more in partnership with our other orders of government, but how many additional units of different barriers of housing have been created. Since 2021, 555 additional units of shelter. BC Housing's numbers have come online. I believe 146 shelter beds are available currently, and more, you know, being explored. And so those, I think, are metrics that we would look to talk about capacity. The point-in-time homeless count, that would be another one, I believe, last done in 2021. And so I understand there's an update forthcoming, and so more metrics that we would look to.
Hey, you mentioned that you're also trying to put like education into the programming as well, and I'm wondering what kind of education programming do you have in mind for bridging the gap between the understanding of like there's an unhoused person, they're not dangerous, they just had a hard time. It doesn't make them living outside a danger to you. There's a big stigma with that, and I can tell that just in this room, right, is that education needs to be there. How is the plan to get that to the general public?
So I think there's been a lot of work done on the staff side and with the varying levels of leadership and out in the community to talk about introducing things like naloxone training. So for example, our bylaw officers carry that tool. They employ it. They have conversations with folks about its use. We participate in community events. Yeah, and so
Where's the education to bridge that stigma?
so I would point to a lot of ongoing effort around bylaw services calls related to paraphernalia. So at one time, very high volumes of calls requesting city resources to come out and pick up a single needle or a piece of paraphernalia. And so through education about, how you can properly dispose of this, what are you looking for, how do you handle these goods, what are the tools that you might need. I see, and if I'll finish this one, but the behavior change, the comfort that changed on part of the community, as we've seen those calls for services dramatically decrease. And so we're thinking that that's because there's been a reduction in stigma around that one activity. It could be multifaceted, but I guess what we're seeing is there was a high volume count. We've done a lot of work to talk to folks about how that can be safely dealt with without sort of calling in a taxed resource to support in those different places. And we've seen so that education change of behavior is one example. Generally, So I think it's operational through those individual officers, individual staff members, through the outreach folks engaging in those conversations. So I think it's a lot of one-on-one conversation wherever we have the opportunity to share it. In terms of like a formal education program with folks coming in for like classroom instruction, not so much of that, but it's the Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Certainly not the goal, right? Again, my thinking is thoughtful and compassionate responses, and so I appreciate that there's more work to be done there. Thanks for that.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. There are 4 questions online. You'll enjoy this one. If you had an unlimited budget, what would you change in protective services and why?
If I had an unlimited budget, I would look to some of the existing recommendations, and rather than have to prioritize them or break them out over multiple years, we might try to move on some of those quicker. And so maybe I'm not dreaming big enough, but I would look to some of the recommendations that we have in place that are just too large for any municipality to do at once. And I think it's iterative, so we would attempt some of those pieces, gather the data, the feedback. Is this working? Is it not? Do we need to change our tone or approach or how we're talking about it? And then take that next step.
Crime is happening across the province, but you are responsible for Prince George. So what steps are you going to take to reclaim downtown?
So a multi-departmental piece, right? There's an economic development angle to that. There's a planning and development angle. There's fantastic services that we look at, like our farmers market, the great work that great events that happen in the downtown. There's the different concerts that occur. And so there's no one action that's going to change some of that trajectory. I think what the department can do is advance reasonable staffing pieces that address some of the needs, that try to fill those gaps that we talk about around the cleanliness or around the community policing. And so we identify those gaps and we try to fill them one by one. I think that's what we can do. doing nothing certainly is not a recipe to better our situation. And so picking those measurable pieces that we can make an improvement on is where I think we start.
I'm not sure if you can answer this one, but it's an interesting question. On nights or days during civic events and festivals, such as the Crossroads Fest, is there reduced crime?
I wouldn't have the data to back this up in front of me, but anecdotally, I think when folks are coming out and making use of space and it's bright and it's vibrant and there's high foot traffic and so on, you know, some of the vandalism as example certainly isn't present. And so where we do have vibrant community spaces, where we do have those activities going on, I think generally that is something that improves safety. So good, well-utilized spaces. Can be other challenges attached to those particular activities, perhaps, different safety issues depending on what it is. But generally, I would say, in my opinion, certainly those events are a benefit to those areas.
We've got 5 minutes left with you before we move on to events, and I have one more question, so there might even be time for one more from the floor if anybody has a question. How will Protective Services work with Indigenous organizations to strengthen culturally responsive safety measures and emergency services in Prince George?
I love the question. So there is, I think, a ton of work going on between not only Lele Tene is our most immediate partner, but regionally and beyond when we look at Prince George as a gathering place in the north to time immemorial. And so there's a ton of work within the emergency management function to talk about that cross-pollination and support, and how do we do evacuations, and how do we work together in times of wildfire, floods, ice dams, and so on. And so there's a great deal of work in that particular space. City of Prince George in 2023 created a intergovernmental relations manager tasked with a lot of that point person work. So things like reconciliation or things like improving those relationships are a cultural piece across the city, but having an identified point person to help support and make sure that we are advancing goals is something that the city has invested in recent years. Most recently, you know, this is operationalized in a lot of ways. So we have annual staff-to-staff meetings where senior leaders from all 3 local governments, including the nation, come together as staffs to explore how we can work more collaboratively together, where those synergies are. The city does that as elected council between the 3 governments. That happened just recently in October. There's monthly meetings between the heads of the 3 governments, chief, chair, and mayor, to talk about shared issues. There's joint advocacy that we've been seeing, and so in September, as example for UBCM, our elected folks, I think we should be, you know, really proud to see the example that they're setting in advocating together jointly to the premier, to the minister, whoever it is. And so I think we enjoy a very strong relationship. It's one that requires constant maintenance and attention to make sure that we are acting the way we hope that we all would. But I think it's something that we ought to be fairly proud of.
We do still have a couple more minutes with you. I have 3 more questions, and again, any questions we don't actually get to in the time limit, we will still get the answers to them, and we'll post them on our website on the Get Involved page. This next question, and I'm just reading them in the order that they were received, is with the amount of structure fires and crime caused by non-tax paying individuals at the Patricia encampment, is it possible to stop all services to the place?
So it wouldn't be advisable, and so I think we need to again start from that place of thoughtful and compassionate responses. You know, human beings, charter protected rights, so on, the same as you and I in this room, and so different circumstances have led to different responses. Folks trying to survive, folks living in a different way than maybe you or I choose to, but again, folks that deserve thoughtful and compassionate responses to the circumstances they find themselves in. So limiting services beyond what they currently are, I don't think would be advisable on the part of our department. We certainly wouldn't advocate for it. Some of the services that are available broadly at this time are removing refuse from the site, and that really gets down to addressing both the health and safety needs of the individuals in that location, where it has been mandated that overnight sheltering is permissible in the city of Prince George at this time. So that is where folks are able to be sheltered at the moment. But that also helps reduce the fire risk. It helps reduce the amount of smoke that's occurring. It helps reduce congestion on site, and therefore limits the need to spread out. And so that service, you know, I appreciate some may look at it as a expense that ought not to be incurred, but not incurring it harms both the health and safety of the individuals there, and also limits the folks that may be upset about that expenditure in actually resolving that occurrence in the long term.
An easy question for your last one.
We'll see.
What are your top 3 priorities for the 2025 police budget?
For the 2025 police budget specifically, we know that body-worn cameras are something that is being rolled out federally, and so addressing what that means for our municipality in terms of transcription needs and so on, that's a priority to understand that federal program that has been put upon us. Helping advance the staffing plan that's in place, putting that forward for consideration is a priority. We heard in 2022, a third party assessed that there was a need for 20 officers at that time and an unidentified number of municipal employees to support, figuring that total number would be about 30. And so continuing to thoughtfully advance that staffing plan would be the second.
Bonuses for communications staff? A vacation for communications staff, perhaps? I don't want to put ideas in your head.
We'll take it under advisement.
Mr. Beasley, how would you like to talk about civic facilities and events?
Thank you for your time and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Depineau.
Hi, everyone. First of all, congratulations on everybody sticking it out this long. Pretty impressive that you stayed here this long. I've got approximately a 4-hour speech that I would like to make for you, which I know you're going to stay riveted to every second. Now, I'm going to very briefly introduce my department simply by just talking a little bit about each area in very brief, and then would be happy to answer any questions. My name is Andy Beasley. I'm the Director of Civic Facilities and Events. Our department has got quite a few varied responsibilities. The first one on the list is the Capital Projects Management Office. This is the office that oversees all capital projects in our city, oversees them. And this is to ensure that all of the correct policies and procedures are in place and followed, all the proper financial reporting is done, all the communication to council and to the community is done. This is an initiative that's been taken over the past few years to make sure that right across the board, when we're doing spending tax dollars on big capital projects, that we're doing them all very consistently and properly, and again, making sure that all of the policies and procedures are being followed. The city owns, as you heard earlier from Mr. Dalio, about 56 buildings, and that includes things like the library, Two Rivers Gallery, the arenas, the pools, City Hall, some senior centers, the Conference and Civic Center, some parkades, the Connaught Youth Centre, the PG Playhouse, Exhibition Park, everything that's up there, the RCMP building, fire halls, etc. So it's a big responsibility that our department is responsible for all of these what we call vertical assets or buildings. So project delivery is the division that actually takes care of all of the capital projects for all of those buildings. Now, something Mr. Dalio mentioned earlier, I just want to emphasize, the average age of our buildings is 50. So think about that. That means about half the buildings are older than that. And that's getting fairly significantly old. So as you can imagine, a lot of those buildings require pretty major capital projects. That ranges from everything from building a brand new building or major projects on existing buildings. That could include a giant HVAC replacement project, a new roof, a new ice refrigeration plant in one of our arenas, major electrical upgrades, that type of thing. Just of note, a current project that we're working on right now in the Capital Department is the Aquatic Centre building envelope renewal. The building envelope, the roof, many of the thousands of components that make up the insides of the Aquatic Centre are included in this project. Our community is really tough on some of our facilities in particular, arenas in particular, and pools in particular, because of the freeze-thaw cycles, the humidity levels, the changes in heat and so on. It's really rough on these buildings. So we do very regular maintenance, and I would say our crew does a very good job on regular maintenance in our buildings, and they're kept in really good shape. But at some point, a decision has to be made. How long do we want to keep that building into the future? Not now, not over the next few months or years, but way into the future. Maintenance can only do so much. So, for example, just thinking about your own home, you can maintain the heck out of it and just be meticulous in how you keep it painted and in really good shape, but at some point, your roof needs replacing. The carpets wear out, the floors maybe wear out in some places, the hot water tank and furnace needs replacing. So similar to the Aquatic Centre, except the Aquatic Centre is on a massive scale, there's significant things that need to be done with that to ensure that in 25 or 30 years from now, our gift into the future is to say we've done a major overhaul of this centre so that 25 years from now, we can look at the facility and say, you know what, it's still in incredibly good shape for an incredibly old building, and if we put a bit more money into it, we can maybe extend it for another 10 or 15 or 20 years, even beyond that. So that's the goal of this. The reason that we're doing the Aquatic Centre all at once, because we have been questioned about that, is because we are very concerned about the cost of the project, and the idea is that the analogy is once you crack a building open, it's way more efficient and way less expensive and way less disruptive to our users to fix it now. The alternative is to crack the building open, do little bits of it, put it back together again, crack it open again, do some more bits, put it back together again. So we're very excited that we're able to just get this done properly and make sure that the Aquatic Centre is something that will be in the future. We're going to be really happy that we did this now. This department, by the way, is also responsible for all of the maintenance on all of the buildings. That includes everything from cleaning, fixing faulty plumbing, repairs of all kinds. Again, it's a tremendous challenge given the age of our buildings. My department's also responsible for the Canfor Leisure Pool and the PG Aquatic Centre. Those facilities have about 450,000 visits each year, and the Aquatic Centre hosts many tournaments and brings in some other revenue to the city, by the way. Just, for example, next year, the Pisces Swim Club is hosting the BC Summer Swim Association's Provincial Championships. Get this, 1,800 participants next year. That's almost 6,000 visitors when you include the coaches and the parents and the families that come with that. Secondly, the PG Conference and Civic Centre is also a very important part of our city, the building we're in right now. This year alone, we've got about 305 events happening in this building, so it's busy all throughout the entire year. Almost 70,000 visitors coming this year into this building, and many of them, if not the majority of them, are also visitors from out of town on conferences and events and so on. Our events group is the team responsible for what I like to say is most of the fun stuff in Prince George, including all of the conferences and events here at the Civic Centre, but also major events throughout the city, things like the Women's World Curling event that we had recently, the Special Olympics, which we've got coming up next year, Summer and Winter Games. And then all the way through, this group also helps with things like Downtown PG Summer and Winter Fest, Foodie Fridays and the Canada Games Plaza. This group also does all of the bookings for all of the arenas and all of the facilities. So all of the minor hockey and lacrosse and figure skating, all of those groups all get booked by our events group staff. An arm of that group is something called Civic Initiatives and Partnerships. It's actually not up on the slide there, but that's the division that provides the grant program to our city. We provide grants to over 70 nonprofit groups each year. That's the staff that actually oversees the grants process. They also provide multiple partnerships and work with a huge number of groups to provide many of the services that we benefit from in our community. That's through the nonprofit associations and so on. This division's also recently been responsible for overseeing the Accessibility Committee and the important work that they are doing. CN Centre, it doesn't really need an introduction to this group in this particular room, but it's one of our crown jewels. It's already 30 years old, so that's another building that is going to be requiring some tender love and care, although again, I will say it is in great shape for a building that old. the CN Centre is, I actually want to do a little brief history. This, I promise it'll be super quick. I sometimes hear the comment, well, Prince George doesn't get any good concerts. And that drives me crazy when I hear that, because I remember just before the CN Centre was built, you know, the biggest concert we ever had was maybe Nazareth at the, what was then called the old Coliseum, and there was a great concert, or maybe April Wine or something like that. But since then, the CN Centre and the incredible staff up there have been able to build a reputation where promoters are now willing to come to Northern BC. Grand Prairie, Dawson Creek, all those communities owe the CN Centre the fact that they're getting concerts at all, because nobody would ever come up here. The fact that we now get, we had Elton John, we've got Shania Twain, we've got Cirque du Soleil multiple times coming over, and other top world famous acts is really, really quite something. And if you ever want, if you've never done this and you want to take a look at what, if you think we don't get good acts here in Prince George, take a walk around the concourse of the CN Centre and just look at all the posters, and stick your head in the administration office and look at the hundreds of posters they've got there, and it's pretty mind-blowing. The other thing, from an economic point of view, the CN Centre alone attracts about 500,000 visitors per year. Just the Cougars alone last season had 186,000 people go to their games. And finally, we also have 6 arenas in total. So the CN Centre, plus we have the 3 Kin arenas, the Copar Memorial Arena, and the Elk Centre. About 75 different user groups use our arenas. Collectively, if I include all the arenas, CN Centre, and Exhibition Park, that's about 1.5 million visitors per year go through those facilities. And our staff are responsible for all of those facilities, including running them. So in summary, this department is responsible for all the buildings in Prince George. That includes everything from building buildings, repairing buildings, and in the case of our recreation facilities, operating the buildings. We also facilitate a lot of the fun stuff in Prince George in terms of entertainment and events. So I'm open to questions. Do my best.
We have 4 questions online, so I'll start with one of those, and then I'll go to the hand that's raised over here. Is it possible to have more public indoor skating? Is that only possible with sponsors? Fort St. John, Terrace, Smithers also have great public skating programs.
The answer is yes, it is possible to have more. So we base our public skating based on attendance, and I don't have the exact numbers of times per week that we do it, but we do it at the Copar Memorial Arena downtown and also at the Elk Centre, and it's very much based on attendance. So if we see more people coming and more demand, we'll certainly open it up. We also offer public skating as part of the school program, so we do actually have during the daytime a lot of public skating. But yes, the answer is yes, we would expand it if the need is there.
Hi. I do believe these are the October minutes from a meeting you guys had. It says that you added an additional $25,000 to be approved to the communications budget for these specific biannual engagement events. I'm just wondering what the original number it was that got added to and how those are being spent.
Okay, now, Ms. Rogers, are you okay answering that? This is the communications director.
Yeah, this one's
Manager.
actually for me. Oh my goodness. So the $25,000 is more like a just-in-case line. So if we had to have an event like this one only, we also had to hire a moderator. It's the rental of the facility.
And then when the money doesn't roll over, it says, where does that go out?
Oh, it goes back into general revenue. I don't get to keep it and have more build up next year. But it's a lot on advertising, the printing of posters, the rental of the facility, things like that. Oh, there was 2 ads in the Prince George Citizen. We had the radio station here that was live all day. We had for today, yes, and over the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 ads a day on 2 different radio stations. We've also had some television commercials. And we had a digital ad. I can't remember if it was with the radio station or the newspaper, but we also had a digital ad. And we put it on our social media channels, I think 8 times.
So what was the original communications budget for these meetings? Then the $25,000 added for the additional possible advertising, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say that how much we budgeted for this because I have. Yes, there is a metric for the, yep, I wrote that. So yes, there is that metric for the addition of a just in case we need.
Advertising, printing, graphic design, staffing overtime, audiovisual, live stream, facilitator, venue, and refreshments.
Yes. So if we had an event that required all of those things, that's how much money we would need. But we could have an event where we don't need a facilitator, or it's during the day, so there's no staff overtime. For this event, it comes out of my general budget. So I have a budget for all communications, and I try to make sure I don't spend it all, so I have lots to spend in the fall on events like this.
If you're not anticipating spending that money, why is it still allotted for these two specific engagement events?
We allot it because we don't know what the event in the spring will be. So, for example, we're going to undertake a review of parking. And so we might, as part of that review, go, we need to have a great big meeting with hundreds of people and a big event, like something like this. Or we might go, we need to have 3 workshops, in which case we've budgeted for it, but we really only needed to have 3. Because we want to make sure we have enough money if we need to do a lot of engagement. We could end up having to have 6 events, and then I'm not going to have enough. But we have $25,000 if we,
Thank
plus
you, Ms.
my original
Rogers.
budget. Yes.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if we could go back to civic facilities and events and perhaps answer those questions
Absolutely.
through another process. Thank you.
And I'm happy to chat with you more about it if you'd like. How can we get more outdoor concerts in the city?
Well, I'm glad that question's being asked. So one of the initiatives we're working on right now, I don't know if you can see it in the dark as you're on your way out, but there's some construction happening in the Civic Plaza. Working with Tourism Prince George, we're massively redoing that, and the goal is to transform that space. I don't want to say too much about it because there'll be some media releases, but I think the community is going to be pretty darn happy with what's happening out there. And one of the features of that is that we want to have a lot of concerts, events, different presentations that are happening in the Civic Plaza. We're also working with downtown Prince George, as well as some of the private businesses that also have done some very successful outdoor concerts now. I guess I shouldn't really shout out all the private businesses, but there's been a couple in particular that have done really successful street parties, and we have been involved in assisting them with planning those, and we love them. We think that they're the way to go. So we are working on that hard.
First, I just want to say I think the civic events are awesome. I love them. I hope to see more of them. I think you're doing a great job with stuff like Foodie Fridays and Summerfest and all of that, so thank you. I'm curious about the new pool and the new downtown pool. How come the exterior isn't completed, like the sidewalk on 6th and the landscaping and whatnot? And I've also heard rumors of there being serious structural issues on the inside. Is that true?
The Canfor Leisure Pool is, when you open a major facility, there are always what we call deficiencies, in some cases seasonal deficiencies, landscaping being one of them, and other quirks and things that we're trying to sort out with the building. So as far as the building itself, we're still learning it and investigating to see how it's working, what's not working. I will say, as far as the outside landscaping, that has been indescribably frustrating for us. It is, I can give you excuses, but people don't want excuses, but it is to do with specific contractor availability, which is at a near impossible point in our community right now. I will commit on behalf of the city that we're not going to take excuses anymore. So in the spring, you'll see that finished, because we are really, really frustrated that the outdoor landscaping has not yet been completed at that pool. It's been improved. I mean, the weeding's been done and so on, but it's still not finished. So I share your frustration with that, and we'll make sure it's done.
I have a question online. Can we get current artists to Prince George? I think they're talking about music.
Yeah, so the music business is absolutely dictated by 2 main things. Number 1 is who's available to come. So our CN Center manager, Glenn Mickelson, is as well connected as anybody, I'm not exaggerating with the statement, in North America, as far as his ability to connect with promoters and artists that want to come and tour. He's actually the only Canadian in the, I can't remember what it's called, but the something Hall of Fame, the people that do promoting events and so on. And Glenn Mickelson's in there. So he is as connected as you can be. So it's based on artists that want to come here or that can come here. Obviously, for a band to tour, it has to make sense. So a band wouldn't just come to Prince George and then leave and go back into the States. It doesn't make any sense for them. They would have to go to Vancouver and then maybe Prince George and then Kelowna and then maybe over to Edmonton. They have to do a route. So if a current band is available and they want to come here, we will talk to them. The second factor is ticket sales. So we run concerts and events similar to a business. We don't want to lose money on them. We want to, at the very worst, break even on a concert or hopefully make considerable money. And so it's based on past experience and what our knowledge is of the market. So if there's the current band that wants to come to the CN Centre, that's great, but we know that they're only going to sell 400 tickets. We would redirect them to Vanier Hall or something like that, or they would choose not to come here. So I guess it's a long-winded answer. The short answer is we're always interested in any act that wants to come up here. We'll do a business analysis of it, and if it makes sense, we always bring them up all the time. Thank you for Come From Away. That was a great show. That was wonderful. Wonderful night.
Are the buildings like the pools or the CN Centre paid for by the user fees? As in, like, is the tickets to get into the pool, does that ultimately pay for the maintenance of the pool? Like, if it was a business, would it be profitable?
So yeah, I can answer that, I think, quite concisely. So all of our recreation facilities are subsidized one way or another by tax dollars. All of them, and that's pretty much across North America. Again, that's a standard. There are some examples of some private ice rinks. I know of one in Kamloops. I think it's called the Ice Box, and you pay about, without any, well, this is actually several years ago, about $400 an hour to rent that place. So that would probably, in a winter city where we value our indoor recreation and 6 months of the year we need indoor recreation, our facilities are subsidized. But they are in almost every single community. Our arenas are somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% subsidized. So what that means is the user fees and the revenue we get pays for about half of the operation, and the other half comes from tax dollars. The CN Centre is better than that because we sell, especially when the Cougars are doing well, we sell more tickets and we profit from some of the Cougars. Well, we profit from quite a bit of the Cougars games, and the concerts also typically make us some money too, so the CN Centre does a bit better. Pools are a different story. Pools are very expensive, and Mr. Dalio can shoot me a look, but I'm going to say they're somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 or even 70% subsidized. Is that about correct?
I think if you were to...
Microphone, please, up front.
I think if you were to factor in like the capital costs, the annual reinvestments that you need from a capital perspective, it would probably be even closer to 15 to 20% is all the user pays, and the rest is subsidized by taxation.
Thanks.
I have a question online. Why has Prince George not replaced the CN Centre? Places like Dawson Creek and Penticton have better, larger concert space than we do.
Well, the CN Centre is 30 years old, and it is in fantastic shape. We have, and that's not just me talking, this is all of the visitors that come and all the promoters from all over the world. Almost every one of them says, my goodness me, what a great facility. It's clean, it's in great shape. So I would say the CN Centre has got some good life left in it yet. And in terms of the size, it's a perfect size for Prince George. It's there are some arenas, I better not name communities because Ted's in the audience and he'll report me and I'll get in trouble. But there are communities that have, you know, the council of the day, the community said, let's build a 1 million seat arena, and unfortunately they're not used. There's one facility not very far from us that was just mentioned in that question that is a great facility, but it's only used 12 times a year for concerts. It's just too big. They don't use it for minor hockey, or they don't even put ice in it most of the time. It's more or less an empty building other than some concerts. So I don't want to be combative in my answer, but the CN Centre is a perfect size for our community. When it sells out, but a lot of times it's not quite sold out. There's always a few extra seats available.
And another question online is, the library has an awesome patio that overlooks Prince George Main Civic Plaza. Why can't citizens use that patio? Can the city work on making it a usable space?
Yes. Yes, is the short answer. Yes, we can, and we will. It's coming up in the future capital plan. Council's asked about it numerous times. It is coming up, and right now it's because of not work safe, but just safety issues. The width of the railing or something is not quite right. Kids could potentially fall through it, I think. So we are going to be bringing that to council for consideration for an upcoming short-term capital project, so that we can use that. The library is quite excited. They've got some big plans for using that space too.
And seeing no hands in the room, there is one more question online. What are you going to do over the next year or two to increase Prince George's status to attract better events?
Well, I would say that we've got an events team in working with various partners throughout the community, including Tourism Prince George, that aggressively go after everything possible. We have had, we're always looking for bigger and better all the time. We're always searching that out. We've got some major events coming up. We've got the Special Olympics next year. We've got that Pisces swim meet I talked about. That's huge. We've had in the past, as you know, the Canada Winter Games here. That's about as big as we're ever going to get in Prince George, and we've already got it, and we're certainly not opposed to going for another one. So I would say we have big events coming up. There's other ones that we haven't talked about that are in the works for the future, and we have staff on that all the time, looking, putting in bids, seeking what's best for our community and what we can handle. So I appreciate the question, and it's good motivation for us to keep on seeking out those big events.
Oh, there's one more question in the room. Andy, I did hear a suggestion earlier that we should change the name of your department to the Department of Fun and Games. Well, are you in favor of that?
Part of it is. Sometimes the building repairs and so on isn't quite as fun, and the plumbing issues.
This is more of an observation rather than a question. I utilize the facilities with the pools here in town weekly. With the Canfor pool downtown, I'd like to know who was overseeing the design of that pool. The change rooms, if you've used them, are completely inadequate. They put the lockers right over top of the only bench that you can place your clothes on and get changed at. And if you bend over, you're butting butts with the person next to you, or you have to move to allow them access to the lockers. When you build these multi-million-dollar facilities, does anyone engage with us as the public as to how we're going to use it, or take a look, for example, at the Aquatic Center, which has an extremely inadequate change facility? I just don't see what you were thinking or who was thinking about how this was built.
Feedback noted. Thank you.
That's it. I've got nothing else for you.
Okay.
To end on a positive note, I'm really excited about the direction that the city's moving in terms of enhancing the downtown core and investing in the downtown core, particularly the Civic Center Plaza, and it sounds like stuff's going on with the library. So yeah, I'm fully on board. I think that's a great idea, and I think it's going to pay off, maybe not in a year or in 2 years, but definitely 5-10 years down the road.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, on behalf of City Council and staff, we just want to thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and for those of you that joined both in person and online through our live stream, very much appreciate your participation. We appreciate all your questions and your input, and if you're interested in learning more, you can find all the information about the budget consultation process that you heard tonight, and more information on our Prince George website, princegeorge.ca, on the Get Involved page. So moving from here, the results of the input that we received this evening and that we will receive through our budget survey as well, that'll all be rolled up into a community engagement report that will be presented to Council's Finance and Audit Committee on December 4th. Following that, we have 2 budget meetings scheduled on January 20th and 22nd of 2025, and that's when Council will consider all this information and deliberate on the final budget. So with that, thank you again for coming out, and have a great evening.